Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Strategy International podcast. If this is your first time here, this is a podcast produced for Strategy International, a global think tank that works with brilliant minds all over the world, discussing, analyzing, and researching matters of interest, such as international relations, defense, strategy, economy, environment, and much, much more. I encourage you to go over to strategyinternational.org to learn more about this global think tank and the amazing work that is being done over there. Speaking of incredible minds, we have another incredible guest again today with us, Mrs. Ino Afentouli. She is the executive director of the Institute of International Relations in Greece. This is a leading university research institute affiliated to the Department of International and European Studies at the Pantheon University of Social and Political Sciences. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for coming on the program. Really appreciate it.
George, this is my great pleasure because I have been among the first people in Greece supporting Strategy International in my previous capacity, considering it a great initiative launched at that time by Marios Ευθυμιόπουλος in Thessaloniki. So it's a great pleasure that Strategy developed to become an international think tank and consultancy. And I'm glad that we are with you today to discuss issues of common interest and concern.
It's a great pleasure to have you. Let's jump right in. Firstly, explain to the people listening or watching, what is the Institute of International Relations in Greece, the importance it has had, and of course, the collaborations that you've developed?
Thank you, George. The Institute of International Relations is a leading research institute affiliated to the University of Political and Social Sciences, best known in Greece under the name Pantheon University. It is closely linked to the Department of International Relations and European Studies of this university, and we have a big number of researchers, students, undergraduate and postgraduate, and we are trying to analyze and present the main trends of the international scene, Greek foreign policy, strategic issues, and regional problems.
Fantastic. And it's great to have you here with the expertise that you have, because we're going to focus a lot on Greece's recent developments, both internally and regionally. And just before we get started, I wanted to pick your brain a little bit, because I was reading some articles recently on Greece's developing economy. A lot of people are noticing what's happening in Greece. The unemployment has been under 10%, I think, which is the lowest since 2009. Of course, in certain other countries, 10% is still considered a high unemployment rate, but considering Greece's recent economy, the fact that it's dropped under the 2009 levels is quite an achievement. Its economic growth has exceeded the EU average. They're projected to grow over 2% this year. What do you think this progress has been attributed to?
Look, I think that, first of all, it's a reaction to the previous decade, which was a very bad decade for Greece, as you may remember. And it was unfortunate what happened. But Greece was not treated fairly, I would say, by big nations of the European Union. Greece is a dynamic society with many young people, very good brains, and we were lucky enough, let's say, to have a very good management of the economy following 2019 elections and the current government, because they are liberals in economics, and they boosted, let's say, the extraverted direction of the Greek economy. Of course, tourism helps a lot. but I don't think we only have tourism as the main pillar of the economy. We have many startups, we have high technology. Hopefully, we can have energy exploitation in the coming years. So it's a it's, as you said, it's an achievement, and hopefully, I mean, it will be sustainable because, we live in an area that is affected by the Ukrainian crisis and other crises in the Mediterranean and the Middle East.
And we're going to get to those because that's very important. But I want to go back to what you're saying about the brilliant minds that Greece has, because I was reading an article a few years ago that was exposing, quite a serious problem. There was this huge exodus of Greece's, quote unquote future, the young students, the young professionals, young families. They were obviously leaving Greece because of the situation, the economic situation. I know in recent years, there have been efforts by the government, whether directly by the prime minister or the minister of foreign affairs or even consular services all over the world, to attract these individuals back to Greece. Have you seen any waves of Greeks coming back home and establishing themselves and contributing to this development?
Look, I don't think, I cannot speak of waves because I'm not aware of. I mean, we had a brain drain, that's for sure. Now we are having a brain gain. It's also true. But let me tell you my approach because I am a cosmopolitan. If we are in the European Union, and Greece is a member of the European Union, we cannot consider a talented person going to work to another country of the European Union. It's a loss. It's you go from Seattle to California, for example. It's the same thing. The income for Greece is the important because people are moving, especially young people are moving around. We are not sitting anymore in the same place, in our offices and so on. So we have to also evaluate mobility and discuss how, these people can help Greek economy from where they are. Investment can be in Greece, but people working for an activity cannot be in Greece.
Right. Let's get to international relations, which is obviously your specialty and what you've been working on for a number of years. One of Greece's most alarming matters when it comes to international relations is the East Mediterranean. It's pretty common, of course, to see tensions, come and go in different waves. But in the last maybe 2-3 years, those tensions have been, I would say, at alarming levels. One of these reasons, in this is this ongoing dispute over the exclusive economic zones. Of course, there's many other issues as well that we can discuss. But for the people listening or watching that aren't very familiar, can you explain this concept of exclusive economic zones and how it has become problematic for Greek-Turkish relations?
Yeah, this is an old issue, of course, going back to the 70s. But as you said correctly, since 2020, Turkey has developed a rhetoric and some maritime activities that are putting in doubt Greece's territorial sovereignty, I would say. Territorial sovereignty, the extent of the territorial waters and the maritime zones. Why this is happening? Because in Turkey, you had this blue homeland theory, which was developed by former militaries, pretending that Turkey is not only a land power, but also a sea power. The thing is that Turkey has not signed the international framework for the law of the sea, which is a universally accepted framework defining its country's rights for exploitation of the maritime zones. Greece has signed this, what we call agreement. Okay, because it's a legal framework endorsed by the United Nations, created and endorsed by the United Nations. So Turkey is not recognizing this framework. Greece is, and Greece has signed similar agreements with Albania and Italy. So I don't see, from the Greek point of view, any problem to discuss with Turkey the delimitation of the maritime zones. But it takes two to tango. So it's up also to Turkey to sit down and discuss with the Greek government how we are going to exploit an apparently very rich underground with the Aegean and the Eastern Mediterranean. So I hope that after the elections in Turkey and in Greece, it may be a window of opportunity for the two countries to sit down and discuss these issues. But in addition, I would say, it's not only a bilateral issue. It's, if you allow me to say, it's a multilateral issue, because the energy resources of the Eastern Mediterranean are not only Greece or Turkey, it's also Cyprus, Egypt, Israel, and Lebanon. So in my view, it would be more productive if all these countries sit down and accept a common framework for the exploitation of the resources, exploration first and then exploitation, by respecting each other's legal rights.
Yeah, and what you're saying, it's very difficult to achieve that, since from the get-go, Turkey hasn't really ratified that agreement. It's interesting what you're saying, and it obviously makes sense in an ideal world for all these countries to sit down and figure out a way to collaborate. But it feels like the East Mediterranean is one giant chess game where everyone is kind of positioning their pieces. Greece, as you mentioned, resolved a long-lasting issue with Italy and Albania, as well as Egypt. They've signed interesting agreements with the Emirates, Saudi Arabia, as well as Israel. These countries have all expressed certain issues against Turkey. Meanwhile, Turkey is signing illegal trade agreements with Libya. They're expanding their influence further into Asia with what certain people might refer to as questionable governments like Azerbaijan and Pakistan. The formation of these different dynamics, is it worrying? Is it a sign of more troublesome times to come?
Look, this is a real question and a real concern for us here in the Mediterranean. But what I'm saying is that there are two ways. For Turkey, if we are talking about Turkey, because all the other countries, they don't have any problem to agree on a framework of joint, let's say, exploration and exploitation. But all the other countries in this equation respect each other's territorial sovereignty. So it's up to Turkey. I mean, after the election, because I don't think anything can happen before, it's up to Turkey to consider the new government, whatever. I mean, Erdogan or the current opposition. It's up to Turkey to say, look, what's my interest there? I mean, if they abandon the revisionism that they have expressed so intensely these 3 years, if they abandon the revisionism, I think there is no problem with the other countries, Israel, Greece. Of course, they have to recognize Cyprus as well, because this is an issue. But I think if you are talking grand strategy, and if they would like to be at the table, they have to make some concessions.
It's interesting that you're mentioning Cyprus, because when you think that the EU has a member state that is still illegally occupied, to many people it makes absolutely no sense. How is that allowed to continue, and how are these institutions like the EU or even the UN not focusing much more on resolving that issue, which has been one of the longest lasting issues in the UN, right?
Absolutely. But the thing is that theoretically, Cyprus is a member of the European Union, the whole territory of Cyprus.
Mm.
But of course, in reality, there is the dividing line, the line of division. And also, there are the threats coming from Turkey about dichotomy and maybe, I don't know, unification and so on. I don't think these threats will be materialized, but it's bargaining chip. Having said that, if a conflict becomes protracted, solution is becoming also more difficult. I'm afraid this can happen in Ukraine, for example. But on the other hand, European Union have a leverage on Turkey if Turkey would like to have a better relationship with the European Union. But they have to appoint maybe a special representative, the European Union for Cyprus, and then to explore the possibility of a viable solution.
Mm-hmm. Now that you're mentioning the collaboration of the EU and the relations in that region, with the recent conflict in Syria, we've seen how Turkey has attempted to instrumentalize and sometimes even weaponize these migrants and use them as bargaining chips with the EU. The repercussions of those actions almost always has had an impact directly on Greece. What responsibility does the EU have on this resurgence of tensions between Greece and Turkey?
In my view, they do have responsibilities because they have not intervened drastically and with a clear plan to bear results. Because the problem with the EU is that the countries, despite their membership to EU, continue having their own national interests. And they pursue their national interests, and some are more close to Turkey, some are more distant. But nevertheless, you cannot have a common denominator in this case. And they have never had a dynamic approach towards Turkey. Of course, there is no carrot in the relationship of the EU with Turkey, because nobody really believes that Turkey will ever become a member of the EU. Not in Turkey, not in Brussels. So if there was a real, let's say, perspective of Turkey becoming a member, I don't think this is realistic anymore. But you can have another kind of relationship that would be interesting for both parties. But this is for the aftermath, I would say, of the war in Ukraine. Because the problem with the EU is that up to now, they stick to a very inflexible framework of relations with members to become, let's say, future members. They ask a lot, and it's not realistic anymore for countries like Turkey to fulfill this criteria. Mm-hmm. And I don't think also for EU it would be interesting to have Turkey, a so big country with population that is bigger than any of the EU members. So we need a new framework of relationships with countries that are of interest, and Turkey is of interest for the European Union and the West. I'm not in favor of abandoning Turkey or losing Turkey. Mm-hmm. But it has to be on a basis of common understanding and obligations and rights.
Let's talk a little bit about NATO. Obviously, before the work that you're doing now over at the Foreign Relations Institute, you were a program manager at NATO, NATO's diplomacy division for over 20 years, with specific specialization in the southern the states, the member states of the southern flank, as well as the Caucasus and Central Asia. That is very interesting, given the fact that over a year now we've all been witnessing what's been going on between Russia and Ukraine. Tell me a little bit, the experience you've had in that specific region. What was the strategy in the time that you were involved over there with these countries? What did you notice?
Yeah, I will tell you in a nutshell. NATO, the countries, the member states of NATO, because NATO is the member states, okay, and also with a US preponderant role. NATO made a very, I would say, revolutionary decision in the 90s when the Soviet Union collapsed. There were two options. Either to bring these countries closer to the alliance, or let them to their own fate. We opted for the first option, and correctly so, because the countries of Eastern and Central Europe gradually became members of NATO. So they abide by the same rules, and they became more stable and more predictable to their neighbors. Anyway, it is a precondition if you become member of the alliance to resolve in a peaceful way your differences with the neighbors. With the countries of Caucasus and Central Asia, meaning all the former republics of the Soviet Union, the deal was to offer them partnership. This form of partnership was, in my view at least, because as you said, I manage the portfolio of these two regions, it was to bring them closer, not for offering membership, because it was impossible, to offer membership to Central Asian countries or even the Caucasus countries, but to offer them some know-how, how to modernize their armed forces and their societies. To facilitate their transition from the Soviet past to a modern democratic regime. It's not, that we have ideal democracies in these two regions, but nevertheless, the idea was that if these countries have an interaction with NATO countries, they will become more predictable in their foreign policy choices. And I think to a very large extent, we succeeded with partners. So this was the main idea of partnership. This is something that Russia disliked from the very beginning. It was not only about Putin, also Yeltsin at the time had objections. Because Russia being an authoritarian country, they never understood the value of democratization for foreign policy. Democracies tend to be more peaceful. And despite the efforts of the alliance, also to have a dialogue with Russia, finally we ended up with what we see now in Ukraine. It is a tragedy. I would say vehemently reject what Russia is saying about NATO's expansion, because we respect Russia's, let's say, concerns, but we consider that by having countries predictable also around Russia, Russia would be more comfortable to develop a normal relationship with the West.
There's no doubt that what's happening in Ukraine is horrible. We're talking about an illegal invasion, but there are quite a few academics that are arguing that perhaps NATO, uh, pushed the line a little too much. This action was predictable and could have been avoided had NATO not pushed the agenda so much. Do you share that opinion at all, or do you think that the work, like you just expressed, the work that was done with these either potential future members or partners was the best approach?
Look, I don't share the view. I mean, let me clear. I know the arguments. Some of these arguments have some interesting justification. But on the other hand, having, let's say, lived from inside these 2 decades, I never realized that NATO had an attitude towards Russia that can be characterized an aggressive attitude. As I said, what NATO and the European Union had as a recipe, let's say, for these countries, was to bring them closer to the common set of rules, what we call the international rules-based order. And Russia, being a member of the United Nations Security Council, is supposed also to guarantee this international rules-based order. Having their priorities, their interests, and so on. But considering a threat for Russia, countries becoming more democratic, more predictable, I cannot understand, why these countries are a threat. Poland or the Baltic countries being members of NATO a threat to Russia, because NATO is not by the founding act is not an aggressive alliance. Mm-hmm. So it is a defensive alliance. So for Russia, having NATO members around is, in a way, is more predictable. Mm-hmm. But what I believe, and this was proved by what is happening in Ukraine, is that Putin had a real problem from the beginning with the loss of the Soviet Union. And he had aim, let's say, to re-establish the cloud of the Soviet Union. And this is what he did by invading Ukraine. And he could not anticipate the failure because he believed in the myth that Russia was a country with very efficient armed forces, which has been proven wrong.
Right. How do you see this conflict evolving? Obviously, a lot of experts that we've spoken to don't see this resolving anytime soon. They believe more in the idea that this will be a long-lasting conflict, probably within maybe 5, closer to 10 years. Do you share that approach? Is that where you evaluate this?
5 to 10 years, I would be very hesitant to agree. This is a nightmarish scenario. 5 to 10 years. I think that the Russians cannot afford such a long conflict because the conflict terms are not going to change. Ukraine has a dynamic. It is a dynamic due not only to the Western support. I think it's a national dynamic. So they are not going to abandon this fight. And we have many examples in the past of quote, weaker countries winning a stronger country. And on the other hand, what we are noticing now is that Russia is not a strong country. Mm-hmm. Of course, they have a military machine and having, a very authoritarian decision-making, there is no opposition to the war. There is silent opposition, maybe, but not vocal opposition. So they will continue. And so they they are indifferent of the losses because they don't value their people. This is a problem. So it will be long, but how long, I will not say that long. I am of the view that the Russians for sure would like to influence the next US election in 2024.
Mm-hmm.
Because they consider the Republican Party being less supportive of the war and of the Ukrainian side. So for sure they will go to 2024. And depending on the outcome of the elections, I mean, we will then see if there will be a negotiating solution or if we will still have a conflict there.
Mm-hmm. What role do you think China is going to play? There are certain suspicions this week and even last week that China may be sending heavy weaponry to Russia in order to assist their side of the conflict. Are there any efforts being made to discuss with China and to bring China more towards, the approach that the Western countries have taken on the conflict?
Look, China is certainly interested in the conflict, maybe not in the conflict itself, but in the dynamics that the conflict creates for the international relations post-US unipolar world, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
Because China, the current leadership, believes that we are entering a multipolar world where they have a role to play. And of course they have a role to play because of their economic and military strength.
Mm-hmm.
If I see the dynamics this month and the support for the time being, not material support, only political, diplomatic support towards Russia. In view, Russia will get involved in the solution, and it will be the first big outing, if I may say so, of China in the international scene.
Mm.
Because up to now, China is only playing the economic role, and they have avoided to play a political role in the international scene. The Russians, with this failed operation, offered them the ground to play a political role at the highest level. And they will take this advantage to the detriment of Russia, because Russia will not be a superpower anymore. They are not a superpower, but they consider to be one. So they will be overshadowed by China, and this is a defeat for Russia.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we will have maybe two new blocks, the Western bloc and the pro-China bloc. But it's still early to answer. The Chinese up to now were very discreet in playing an international role. If this has changed, it is to be seen.
Interesting. How do you see this conflict being resolved? What in your opinion should be done? What steps should be adopted in order to maybe bring both parties closer together and achieve this resolution quicker?
Look, this conflict cannot be resolved but by an international conference, similar to the Paris conference that established the post-Soviet Union world. So it has to be an international conference under UN auspices, so that each party finds a place that cannot humiliate. I don't see Russia coming out humiliated by a solution, because it will be more dangerous.
Right.
And this is something we have to repeat to our Ukrainian friends. Of course, they don't have to compromise their national interests, but on the other hand, they have to think that Russia cannot be humiliated. What does it mean? I mean, the diplomats have many solutions, but this has to be an international conference. I cannot see other framework for a solution.
By Russia not being humiliated, are you suggesting that Ukraine need to make concessions on the eastern part of Ukraine that Russia has invaded? Are they going to have to give up some territory?
The eastern part, I don't. I mean, this is this will be involved during the negotiation. We cannot anticipate.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see, for example, Crimea going back to Ukraine. This would be very difficult for the Russians to accept. Mm-hmm. The territories that they have occupied, it is proven they cannot govern them. They are very badly governed. So I don't see how they can keep them. But it's still early. I mean, for the time being, we will hear rather intransigent positions than compromising positions.
Last question with NATO. There is a recent expansion in the works, enlargement rather. Do you think that everyone will vote in favor for Finland and Sweden?
I think at the end, yes. I don't see Turkey going to the next summit in July, which will be held in Vilnius, Lithuania, and sticking to the position that Sweden and Finland cannot become members. I think they will have a big price to pay. And I consider all these negotiations a bargaining chip, but in the end, they will agree, to give the green light.
Interesting. I know you're very busy, and I know it's late evening over there in Greece. I want to thank you very much for all the time that you've taken. I want to invite everyone again to visit strategyinternational.org for all information on what this think tank has been doing. Where can people reach out to you, or to get informed on what you're doing?
We have a very lively website, and I think they can visit us, or they can find me through LinkedIn, and we are always very open to new friends.
The website, just to remind everyone, it's idis.gr, right? IDIS.gr to get to know the beautiful work that is being done over there. Thank you once more. I appreciate your time. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. We will see you all in the next episode.
It was a very big pleasure to me.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care.